Won't he do it? He'll take the storm. That's right. Transformed from life's burdens to freedom, my journey was reshaped by the gospel and the daily principles applied by and communicated to us by Jesus Christ. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm living in freedom from anxiety and from depression. I'm talking massive depression and anxiety. And my name is Rod. You know, tonight I'm going to share with you my testimony, okay? I hadn't really shared it much since we started CR. There's been so many people, so I finally get an opportunity to get back in line and do this. So thanks be to Jesus. Born in 1966, I was a child of a single mother. My father was not in my life. As a matter of fact, I didn't meet my dad until I was approximately 6 years old. And I grew up with a major father wound. Always wanted to make sure that I was going to be a better father than the one that I had. And so my mother was a superwoman. She was both mom and dad for me, and she was the best role model of a mother than I could possibly imagine ever having. She received some fantastic support from my grandparents, my grandmother and my great-grandmother. Now, you know, my grandmother, I called her Big Mama. Okay, everybody's got a Big Mama, right? And my great-grandmother, her name was Odessa. I called her Dia. My great-grandmother was a Choctaw Indian, and so that's part of my heritage. Now, my great-grandmother was my primary, she was my secondary caregiver. My mom took care of me, but my mother was very young, and so while she was in school, my great-grandmother would take care of me. And my grandmother was working. She was a social worker. And my grandmother was very, very loving of a human being and loved people. And I think that's where I actually picked up loving people so much, is from my grandmother. But there's always a memory that you have of your past. And when I think about my great-grandmother, I remember her watching As the World Turns, okay? And she's on the phone with somebody, and she's got her Bible in her hand. And I don't know if she's talking about what's on the TV or what's in the Bible. But the fact is that she was a faithful woman. And she taught me how to love other people. You know, she was a loving human being, and everything that she talked about had a twist in it that landed back on Jesus. And so I see my great-grandmother as I think about life in general for me. And as a child, she really took care of me. I remember when I was 5 years old, and at that time, we lived in Huntsville, Alabama, and the northern part of Huntsville, Alabama. I remember distinctly, you know, there's spots here, but I was 5 years old, and my grandparents lived, my great-grandmother lived with my grandparents, and they lived in the low-income housing area. And my mother and I lived in an apartment complex community not far from there. And within about the very next year of my remembrance, that we all moved into homes. So on the other side of town, like the Jeffersons, we moved on up, okay? But what happened is that I remember that I was holding her hand, and my great-grandmother had just gotten off the phone. Okay, now, there was no cell phones back then, okay? So we had left the house, and she's walking with me, and she looked disturbed. And I could sense it. Didn't know what she was talking through, what the conversation was like. But she said, "Son, let me tell you something." She said, "Never say anything negative to someone until you think thoroughly about what it is you want to say, because you never know how it would affect them. Put yourself in their position." Now, I took that to heart, and I've always been hesitant to say anything super negative, because I say it to myself over to me. If it were me, how would it sound? How would I feel? And so I learned to reconcile that truth practically through her words. And every single time that I walk through the Bible and I find myself in the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, it reminds me of my great-grandmother. And it says here, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. And so that early stage in life, I really took that concretely to heart. And one of the things that I, as a five-year-old, you're lacking a little reasoning. And so I was taken advantage of. I had some family members that molested me. And because I was the only child, so I wanted friends. And my family was very tight-knit. And so I didn't want to say anything about it because I knew that would just blow up the whole family. And so I held it secret. I held it. And to me, that was denial. But as a 5-year-old, there was no one there to teach me that it'll just go away. And so I kept it secret, and I harbored that pain for years. It wasn't until 2019, after we formed CR, that I was sitting around in our step study group, and one guy mentioned what had happened to him. And another guy mentioned that same episode kind of happened to him. And then I had to reconcile with myself and says, wait a minute, that happened to me too. I'm not by myself. I'm not all alone. But denial prevented me from communicating that evening. As a matter of fact, denial, when you ignore it and think that it goes away, it only prolongs your pain and it deepens your hurt. It prevents you from actually experiencing a healing journey. And so I held on to that secret another week, and I had to come clean. And I felt that was the safe circle. And I said, this is why we started CR. So let me just go ahead and put it out there. I can't possibly lead this ministry and hold secrets. And so I came out clean. And I shared with them that I was embarrassed and I was shamed. And I held that shame for 46 years. Imagine that. And so my brothers loved on me. They prayed with me. We prayed for one another. And we've all experienced healing. That's James chapter 5, 16. I was 11 years old when my mother and I moved from Huntsville, Alabama to Ames, Iowa. Now, that's approximately a 2,000-mile trip. And it was as far as a culture shock as the drive was. And so I left a very diverse community in Huntsville, Alabama. For the most part, Caucasians, Black Americans, and Puerto Rican culture. And we moved to Ames, Iowa, and that's a college town, so Iowa State University is where my mom went to school. But while on campus, it looked like the nations were there. But when you go off campus, you're all by yourself. And I was like a pea in a pod, man. And so I knew I was different. And I met wonderful, loving people who loved me back, and they loved me for who I was. Now, I accepted Christ while I was living in Ames, Iowa at Campus Baptist Church at the age of 13. I was baptized, and my great-grandmother was I said I wasn't going to cry. Man. But my great-grandmother was there. Stop. And she saw me get baptized. If I didn't do anything else good in my life, that was it. And so, you know, I excelled in both track and field, and I was a good student. I went to state my sophomore year in high school, and in junior year, I was heading to state. I'm sorry, I went to state my freshman year in track and my sophomore year. And it was a small college town, and so I was kind of famous in town, in high school, at least with the high school crowds. And so we were going to an event, and Mom wanted to pick up a suit for me. And so we went to a store, and I don't know if any of you guys remember Johnny Carson, but he had a suit collection back then. And I was asked to model in one of his suits. And so I was all over the newspaper. I was Flash, man. I was it. Yeah, I had my pick of the litter, per se, right? But Iowa was truly, for me, it was a place to grow. And that college town, I'll remember the rest of my life. We lived in student housing. And so one of the things that I learned about student housing is that that's where you go when you don't have a lot of money. And so for me, I realized, because all my friends were well-established, their parents were well-established. And so for me, it was a humbling experience because I never knew that we didn't have much resources. I didn't grow up in Alabama. That my mom had a job there, but when she decided to go back to school, we were living on student housing resources, and it humbled me greatly because I remember so many of my friends, their parents, reached out an olive branch and helped me out. They would always pay for the movie tickets and take me places and all that great stuff. So I really enjoyed and I miss the love that those people offered to me, and I'll cherish it for the rest of my life. But living on campus, I learned then that I made a promise to myself. I says, you're never going to be poor again. When you become older, you're not going to be poor ever again. As a matter of fact, your kids will never know what poverty looks like. And so I made that promise to myself, and it stuck with me for years. I tell you, we must have eaten chicken 100 different ways. And I can tell you, man, and so I thought I was going to fly away like a bird one day, but it didn't happen. It's just a beautiful, beautiful memories, though, of what Alabama gave me. Yeah. So my desire was to chase the American dream. Decide what you're going to do, put all your ducks in it, and make things happen. So after my mother received her PhD at Iowa State University, she got the immediate hiring at Prairie View A&M University in here. Yep, PV, in a house, right? Yeah. Mom got hired at PV. Now, back in 1982, when we were driving down 290 to get to that area, the thought was we were going to stay in PV. And all I saw was a dirt road. I said, wait a minute, Mom, where's Houston? And she says, it's down the street. And I said, okay, let's go to Houston. Let's see what it looks like in Houston. And let's live there. And so one of her faculty members suggested that we consider Cypress. And so that was a great opportunity for me. Cypress was still somewhat rural, but at the same time, it wasn't dirt roads, okay? And I really appreciated that because I had, my heart was, just take me out, because I just did not want to live on campus at PV at that time. Now it's well laid out. It's a nice established environment there. So, but my mother did very, very well there. It was during my second semester of my junior year in high school when we moved down here, and that right there is what tore me up, because everyone at that time in that stage, they're thinking about prom the next year and all the things. I was on a varsity football team. I was on track. I was going to make it. I was going to probably go to school at Iowa State, what have you. And that, for me, devastated me for a minute. But when we got to Cypress, I was enrolled at Cypress Creek High School. If any Cougars are in the house, I'll reach out to you. But we went there, and at that time, there were only 3 high schools in Cypress. There was Cy-Fair, Jersey Village, and Cy Creek was the newest school. So, it was cool. All the cool kids went to Cy Creek. And I quickly learned, and during my time at Cy Creek, there are 2 crowds that I really met. I met the really studious crowd, which is because I was a good student, and I also met the party crowd because that's where all the jocks hung out. And so guess what happened? The prom I found a girlfriend, and we were dating each other, and all the way up to prom. The day before prom, we break off our relationship. And it actually tore me apart. I was hurt. I was disgruntled. I was ashamed again. Those old feelings came back up. I'm like, what is going on with me and my life, and why am I not good enough? Why did someone have to break up with me on prom night, you know? And so for me, it was discouraging. And I hid, but my party crowd, they wooed me out of the house. And I can tell you that they continued to pour alcohol and other substances down my throat until I numbed out, and I didn't think about prom anymore that night. Now, that left me in a vulnerable situation because I began to go back to that crowd whenever negative things happened. And I didn't know how to handle those things, and it was just my secret and their secret. We would all get together and go partying and go drink and have a great night. Now, as a child, I was often told that I would be a preacher. And so that was always in the back of my mind. You're supposed to be a preacher one of these days. Everyone kept telling you you're going to be a preacher. And look at you. You're getting drunk every night. You're getting drunk every time something happens, or you're smoking that stuff with them. And that made me feel guilty. It made me, again, feel ashamed. And I had to wrestle with that. Now pause for a second, because looking at my family's heritage, my grandfather and my great-grandfather on my mom's side of the family were both pastors. On my father's side, I learned that my grandfather, who I met one time, but he was a deacon in the church. And so I was expected to be a good guy. But for me, worldly gains and rebelling against the faith was part of what I had to wrestle with. The explicit music and the party scenes became a common thing for me at that time. I was hurting. I was a young man hurting, and I had no way to express my pain. And that void left me just indulging in those activities. Now, all of my friends had, girlfriends and this and that and the other, and so, I wanted to play along with that as well. But I learned, that it was told to me that good girls don't like nice guys. And so I tried to be the best version of a bad boy that I could, but I didn't know how. And so I failed miserably at that. But within 6 months after high school graduation, I had planned out on going to the party of my lifetime. It was a homecoming game at, guess where? Prairie View A&M. And so we were getting ourselves all hyped up, getting all of our substances in our bodies, and we were just going to have a full, fun weekend that weekend. And my buddy asked me if I could take him to pick up his vehicle, which was in Hempstead, if you guys are familiar with that destination. So it wasn't that far of a drive, but on FM 1488, it's kind of a windy road, and I had way too many substances in my body, and I really shouldn't have been driving. But we were listening to hype music and all that good stuff, and I decided I'd take it. Well, I lost control of my vehicle, and I was listening to a very explicit song at the time, and my vehicle began to flip 3 times. And all I could remember is that I don't want to die like this, and Lord, please don't let me go to hell. And I remember that. Next thing I know, I'm sitting outside of the vehicle. I was launched out of the back window. And I just kind of looked around. My friend who was with me, he survived. Praise the Lord for that. And he took the bottle of liquor and he tossed it into the woods. And a few minutes later, we hear the sirens coming, the ambulance. I looked down at my hand and I realized that my fingers were hanging off. And they were only being held together by tendons. And shortly, right as the ambulance pulled up, I just blacked out, and I woke up in the hospital. Thank God for the guys that were in the hospital, the ER team. If you know anyone in the ER room, just continue to pray for them. I can imagine the things that they see. But I was a mess. And unfortunately, I spent the following year in rehab. My back was really messed up. My shoulders were messed up, and my hand, obviously. And so I missed, by the way, because of my speed in high school, and I was running track, I was destined to go to University of Houston, and I was going to run on the same track team as Carl Lewis and the other Olympians that he practiced with. And I missed out on that opportunity for the night of partying. And so that lingers in me. It reminds me, but, the Lord had a different plan for me too. And so I realized here that although those dreams were shattered, I had to come to a conclusion and realize they were self-inflicted because I was doing things that I really should not have done. My senior year in high school, I was one of the first in our school to actually get a computer. Now, this is when IBM first launched the PC Junior, years ago, okay, guys, so I know I don't look as old as I am, but I am. I learned a passion in technology, and so technology was my way of doing some wonderful things, and I was so good at it, IBM offered me a internship my sophomore year. And during that year, I learned Big Blue, and I had suits all in my closet, and I decided that I'd go work for them. And I was not going to I was learning more at IBM than I was in my classes. And so I said, well, I'm going to take an opportunity. Well, I remember in the back of my head, I said, I'll never be poor. And I don't want to raise kids to ever be poor. And that stuck with me, and it forced me, it encouraged me to go ahead and take the opportunity and pursue the income opportunity. And so I did. And I worked with IBM for a number of years, and then I left and worked for a couple of corporate organizations in the same industry, and eventually started my own consulting company. And for approximately 25 years or so, I operated my own consulting company. And yes, I did reach my goals. I made a lot of money. And my kids, and I was married, got married. We had 2 wonderful children. And my kids never understood what poverty was because that was my goal, and I obtained it. But in the obtaining of the goal, I found myself stuck. I was stuck because my life was about the money. My value was about the money. Now, I decided to return back to school right around that season because my spirit was just really torn. I could see my mother looking at me in one eye and my stepfather at the time looking at me in the other eye. She has a PhD and he has a master's degree. And so I was like, you're going to do something. When are you going to go back? And I said, well, I have a house as big as you guys. What are you telling me? And that wasn't it. It was a value that we had. And education was a high value. And so I decided to return back to school. But even at that time, I had already reconciled with the Lord. And it was in my spirit that I needed to go back to school, but not pursue technology, but to pursue God. And so I enrolled at the College of Biblical Studies in 2004 and graduated there with high honors. I actually, my cumulative score was a 3.89, but my semester score that semester was 4.0. And there's a wonderful story behind that. Because, as you're finishing your final papers, you have all this homework to do. And my daughter had a gymnastics birthday party. And I'm on my way back from class. I was running my business, full-time student, and dad and husband. And so I was just running ragged. But I left my computer and my bag and all that in my truck. Guess what happens when I walk out of the party? Windows are busted out. Everything's gone. Now, here I am, stuck like Chuck, and I'm like, okay, what is going to happen? I called my professor. I asked him, told him what happened. He gave me 3 days to go ahead and prepare my finals. So, as any good biblical student would do, I prayed, right? And I says, oh, Lord, now I got to really trust you because I have no notes, nothing. Everything's gone. Don't know how I'm going to deal with this. So I rushed to Best Buy at the time, and I grabbed a laptop. And I locked myself in my office. And I remember, for 2 days, that's all I did, just type. Try to remember what I typed. And it floored me how the Holy Spirit brought back to my memory the things I needed to remember and do. And it confirmed my faith for me. I needed that to happen. That confirmed who I was. I'm his child, and I belong to him. And no weapon forged against me can prosper. So I hope that those idiots that stole my stuff, I hope they learned who God was. You know, there's my Bible and everything in there, man. Amazing. Philippians 4, verse 12 through 13 says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And that was my theme at the moment. I was thriving in business. I was thriving in church. At the time, I was part of a church organization that started with about 3,000 members when I arrived. And when I left that organization, we were at 21,000 members. Now, my role was leading the men's ministry at the time, and we had 2,500 men in our men's ministry. And we had a lot going on, but there was something that just didn't sit right with me. And I knew then that the megachurch model was not really where I needed to be. No one cared about my pain. They were too busy to really be focused in on my issues at home. And when I brought my marriage issues to them, I didn't receive any support. You know, there was no one there. We didn't have a CR. But as I drew closer to the Lord, my marriage began to drift, and it led to many complications. And in 2006, my life was so stressed out, it led me to a doctor's visit to see what was going on. And for about a week, you know, I was being tested for an irregular heartbeat. Turns out it was anxiety and depression. And so I wrestled with anxiety and depression from at least 2006 until recently. It reminded me of the biblical principle found in Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 through 45, and it states that when an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest, but finds none. And then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits, more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So also will it be with this evil generation. Now, I reference that because, again, I was super busy and on fire for serving the Lord. And I was cleaning up my house, but at the same time, I wasn't understanding how to close the back door either. Hadn't dealt with my secrets, my pains. Didn't have anyone to walk with me and talk with me and share with me stories that could help me walk through and support me along the journey. My life up to this point had been tainted with experiences that caused all sorts of anxieties, and that led me towards a path of just depression. Now, anxiety and depression are signs that the life that we lead in the moment and the path that we are on are not in alignment with who we are and who we are purposed to be. So for me, I was attempting to live a dream that wasn't designed for me. I had to come clean with that, and I had to really understand that. It wasn't meaning that I was going to accept poverty as a way of life. But what I was chasing wasn't the dream. It wasn't the design that God purposed me for. So during that season of life still, a couple things happened. I'm driving to work, and I get hit by a drunk driver. Early in the morning, 8 a.m. And all I could see and remember is a big truck coming right across my windshield. Flipped the truck, and I spun out, hit a pole, but the Lord saved and spared me. I didn't have any injuries noticeably. And of course, but I had to deal with the burden of the financial issues there because the drunk driver had no insurance. And a year later, I found myself in the ER with a ruptured appendix. Now, likely due to stress, according to the doctor, but an abscess had formed over the appendix. I was a marathon runner, I was a cyclist, and I still love to cycle, but the abscess formed over the busted appendix. And for 5 days, I just thought I just needed to continue to try to work out and use the restroom, what have you. So it was a slow leak. But by the time that I got into the hospital, that July 4th, 2007, I was near death. And I just had a tendency to ignore my own internal pain. I wonder why. So sepsis was kicking in, and the doctor told me about a week later that I was green all inside. And he said one more day I wouldn't have made it. And so I'm, again, grateful that the Lord spared me. He definitely did. So I lived the next 2-3 months on heavy antibiotics. It became clear to me then that God had a purpose for me. And, even in my own stupidity, I couldn't destroy myself. He has a purpose for you too. And so whatever you're going through, I want you to know, keep your faith strong. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Watch him see you through it. If he did it for me, I know he'll do it for you. Around that time, I got caught up in this prosperity teaching, name it, claim it. And Mom was really wise. She bought me a copy of Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and a journal. Now, by the way, I'd been journaling since about 1984, but all of a sudden I was journaling about getting rich and this and that and the other, and buying buildings and, and indulging in Robert Kiyosaki's principles and, all these things. So I began to understand my purpose. And then I realized that, for me, I wasn't born an oops. I wasn't a mistake by God. No, he actually planned for me. And the way I entered this earth is the way I was designed to enter this earth. And so most of my painful moments, the most painful moment that I can remember at that stage was the very next year. In 2008, my mother was diagnosed with colon cancer. Stage 3. And I said I wasn't going to cry. For the next 2 years, I was her caregiver. And when she lost her life, I blamed myself. I said, I could have been a better caregiver. It's my fault. And it burdened me because I just thought that I could help save her. But God had a different plan. And sometimes it's tough as we lose those that are so close to us. My mother was super successful, and it was like her career was just starting off. She was world-renowned and traveling all over the world, and it just felt like it was too short. And so I struggled with that for years. The anniversary was a few days ago, August 12th, 2010. So during this time, my relationship with God felt strained. I sought answers. I didn't hear anything. He was quiet. There was no sound. I couldn't hear his voice. And as I mentioned, the church that I attended they were more focused on seats than hearts. And I became numb. And I began to revisit my past addictions, and I thought that I could overcome them. But there was no Celebrate Recovery for me. There was no one to disciple me through the pain that I was experiencing. And by 2015, my wife and I were in divorce court. And my stepfather had a rigid stance against divorce. And it left me feeling isolated. I recall that during that time, I was trying to handle so many things. I felt that perhaps he would be there as a source to just give me a temporary support. I just wanted to move back in the house for a small season. Before I could even ask that question, I remember him saying, I don't want anyone living with me. And so I knew that wasn't the issue. So I stuck it out. I went and got me an apartment and tried to make things work. I left the church that I was attending, and I found another seat in another megachurch model on Highway 59 over there, the Summit. At the time, it was called the Summit, but the building was, Lakewood Church. And I sat there, and I enjoyed praise and worship. And it was a wonderful season of just being able to sing and try to reconnect with the Lord. And I moved again, like I said, into my apartment. Later on that year, I remember being at church, and I saw a friend she became a friend. I knew her from our past church. Didn't know of her, I just knew of her. And this friend began to attend church services with me every Saturday. Her name is Simone, and she's now my wife. Yeah. But she poured into me, and she reminded me of who I was. And I could really appreciate that season of life. We would go to Lakewood Church and then go to Chick-fil-A and have chicken nuggets afterwards, and fun time. Another friend had introduced me to the Met Cypress and told me that he thought that I would enjoy being in this particular building. It was so close to home. I always like to be closer to home and to worship. And so I came, and the first person that I met here was a guy by the name of Pastor Derek. And some of you guys know him. He used to be one of the campus pastors here. And shortly thereafter, I find myself attending this church. And then, as we were being planted as a new church, I was at that moment transitioned into a men's small group leader and had a wonderful men's group. As a matter of fact, so wonderful of a group. Most of those guys are helping us run CR today. And I'm so grateful for you guys. I love each and every one of y'all. So, yeah, it was great. And so this was a period of personal growth that really led to where God has truly placed me at this moment. I still had my gym, and we were, which was another business model that we had launched. But COVID quickly shut things down, and that started a real big problem for me. It was a challenge because, again, trusting in God with everything, I forgot I was supposed to drop that American dream stuff behind and let him do what he needed to do with me. I found myself trying to play double standards. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, okay? And so, although I loved the gym, committed it to discipleship, as a matter of fact, we were working people out and giving them the gospel message. And many people that were also members of this church were also members of our gym. And so it was really cool to fellowship and work out together. But COVID shut things down. And in the shutdown, I asked God why. Well, I thought we were starting over. We were getting a reset and things were going to be better. Well, I was, again, measuring my value on money. It just happened to be that God has always places a ram in the bush. So I always want you to, when things don't look right, look for the ram in the bush. Look for it. One of my clients happened to be Pastor Bob. And I remember the first day Pastor Bob says, I see you pastoring people in this gym. I think you have a space on our team. And I sent him my credentials, and he saw, all those things. And it felt like years, but it was just simply weeks before I found myself as a staff member here at the church. It was a wonderful transition for me. It didn't pay me anything close to what I was accustomed to making in life. But again, I had to leave the old me behind and pick up where the Lord wants me. Now, despite that, I can tell you one thing. I've been happier and less stressed out ever since, okay? One of my early projects while here, as I was hired as the executive pastor at the time, But one of my big projects was to help get this building in order, and man, it was breaking down all over the place. But a year later, another ram in the bush showed up, and that was Pastor Terry. And he has been a seasoned executive pastor. And one day we were all sitting around the table, and I was asked, you know, Rod, I hear every time you talk about missions and people and the area and your love for the community. Would you like to launch missions? I says, absolutely. Love that. And so I did. And God gave me that opportunity. And Pastor Terry took all my problems away. And so I love him for that. I love him for that. Now, the first leg in missions that we launched was CR. I had another ram in the bush, a crystal. Everybody needs a crystal in their lives. But she took all my tasks, you know. And then later, other guys, you know, my men's group kicked in. And everybody just like, we were enjoying this journey. And we launched CR. And since we launched CR, we're almost in year number 4. Next month will be year number 4. Time flies when you're having fun and God's blessing and just raining down blessings. We've seen over 1,600 people in this ministry. We've touched a lot of lives in this ministry. The Lord has put a huge number of people through step study because of our obedience. I've seen people walk out of deep, dark places in life. And I just wonder if we weren't obedient. What if we decided just to abandon ship? Wonder if I said, no, I'll go back and start a business and try something different. I learned that when I trust God with all my heart, all my soul, all my might, yeah, he will always see me through to the next step. And so I want to encourage you to try trusting God with all your heart, all your might, all your soul. And then those other things, they'll come with it too. My relationship with Jesus Christ has deeply influenced my recovery journey. Applying God's word has brought me freedom. It's brought me freedom in a meaningful ministry, and to be able to work alongside other saints in this ministry has been an absolute treasure and a pleasure for me. CyLife, or at the time, it was called Celebrate Recovery, and we changed it to CyLife Recovery because our commitment was to stick with the DNA of this church and disciple and take our time and walk with you through step by step by step, no matter how painful it is, no matter how long it takes. So step studies don't always last a year. My personal step study has lasted almost 3 years. Just an FYI for you. So it depends on you. And also how much you like being around each other too, I guess. But I found new hope, and the weight was removed. I was in a space where I could drop condemnation, conviction would rise up, and then I would allow me and the brothers to pray, and freedom and healing would soon arise. So I'm committed to what we're doing here. And I think the greatest commitment is found in step number 1. We admitted that we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. Yeah. See, this is a super impactful statement for myself because for so long I lived that story that I could control the end result. I knew that there were things that were beyond my control, without a doubt. But I attempted to change the narrative every single time, no matter how many walls I would bump up against. But to admit that I am powerless over my behaviors and my life is unmanageable, it gave me new freedom. I was able to face myself in the mirror and see myself as who I really am, a child of God, loved, protected, cared for, just like you. So when things don't go as planned, I can now openly admit this principle and live without harboring a lie. So the new me, I've seen profound changes in my relationships with God's work in my life, and By trusting God's truths in this ministry and my accountability team, I've embraced a new perspective on life. Immersing myself into God's word and the CR principles has transformed my communication with others, including my wife, my relatives, and the man in the mirror. My internal dialogue is now mostly positive, bringing peace, joy, and fruitful relationships all over the place. Stinking thinking no longer is my partner. No, that is good, dead and gone. I don't talk negative to myself anymore. I prayed and I trusted God for new strength for the combat. And he gave it. He gave me new armor. He gave me people who love me, who I love back. He gave me a family that we call Forever Family. As Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given to you. And I'm standing here as a witness. Yes, he will. Romans 12, 1 and 2, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So when I awaken every single morning, I seek first the kingdom of God. I do this by digging into God's word. And my wife loves me because I always have my phone, and I know that light disturbs her, but she doesn't complain. She knows I need it. And I appreciate you for that. I get myself into the word, I document my thoughts, and then I recognize that as Paul has written, I need to accept God's invitation. I need to accept his mercy that has been extended to you and I. I needed to accept that in order to take what I am right now, this dirty, unworthy human being as I am, and offer myself to God every single day. Even though I'm not as clean as I would like to be, I'm not without a blemish. But the Lord has seen me through the lens of his Son, Jesus Christ. And when the Father sees me through his Son, Jesus Christ, I am perfectly clean. And so I place myself on his altar every single morning. Here I am again. I'm offering myself as a living sacrifice for you, to be used by you. I am your instrument. Use me as you want. Whatever it may be, so be it. I have the choice to conform or not to conform. And I choose to not conform to the patterns of this world. That's a choice that we have. But by seeking first the kingdom of God, I am transformed daily. It's a daily process of renewing your mind, washing your thoughts with God's truths, so that I can see more clearly and discern what is his will, his perfect and his acceptable will. So no longer am I taken by the confusion in my own flesh or my own desires, but I see clear. I see what the Lord has truly purposed me for. CR is my community. CR is my freedom. And CR is my forever family. So I can live fully, transparently, and vulnerable before my CR family. And I love you guys for that. Now, I've experienced God working through our hurts. It is where we hurt the most is often where we tend to find God. I've learned that much about myself as well. We experience his healing power, and then we're able to find freedom when we get to that particular point. I've always said that I wish I had CR much earlier in my lifetime. But if this is your first exposure to CR, and if you're being honest with yourself and recognize that you may be harboring hurts, hang-ups, and habits, then I urge you, honestly, take an honest look at yourself at this healing ministry and allow yourself to be changed by it. You have to have a heart that's willing to be changed, to be transformed. Freedom is worth the effort. And so I would like for us to pray now. I would invite our leaders, our prayer leaders, to please take your places amongst the front. And as the music begins to play, I would invite each of you at your tables to also pray along with me.